Jewish conversion to the Bahai faith, Moshe Sharon, Hebrew University, Jerusalem. The Bahai Faith is the youngest world religion. Born in Iran in 1844 in the fold of Shiite Islam, it succeeded in breaking away completely from Islam during the first 160 years of its existence and crossing its boundaries of origin, forsaking the languages of its birth, Persian and Arabic, and spreading out over the whole world. By now, 2007, it boasts almost 6 million adherents. All Baha'i believers answer the call of the Baha'i teachers to join the new religion out of free will and conviction. Since, unlike the Christian church, this new faith does not have organized institutions of conversion and proselytizing, the fact that members join out of their own free will deserves to be appreciated even more and testifies to its particular attraction. More significant is the fact that a religion that was born deep within the culture of the East spread so quickly and seemingly so effortlessly in the West, particularly among Christians, taking into consideration the fact that its prophets and teachers professed Islam. Moreover, they emphasized Islam's true divine message, insisted that Muhammad's prophecy stood on the same level as that of previous prophets, Abraham, Moses, and Jesus, a prophet according to the Quran, and that the Quran was a book of revelation similar, not superior, to the Old and New Testaments. But it was not only Christians and Muslims, mainly Shiites in Iran, who were attracted to the Baha'i faith. Many Jews joined it too, forsaking the ancient religion of their fathers. The Jewish conversion to the Baha'i faith is particularly interesting and has attracted the attention of quite a few scholars. The Jews joined the faith in its country of origin, Iran. There are no reports of any significant conversions of Jews to the Baha'i faith elsewhere in the East, except for the Iraqi Jewish converts who were an appreciable percentage of the Baha'i community of Iraq, even though they were not a large number in absolute terms. This article, therefore, deals with the conversion of the Jews in Iran, where they were among the early converts to the new religion, first here and there as individuals, and from the late 1870s in massive numbers. The Jewish conversion to the Baha'i faith in Shiite Iran is an amazing phenomenon, particularly since at first glance it seems completely illogical. The Baha'is, from their very inception of their existence and already in their Babi stage, were a persecuted group. They were regarded by the Shiite clergy to be apostates who forsook Islam, Murtad, and therefore deserving to be punished by death. The Jews, for their part, were not only persecuted, despised, and degraded, but they were regarded to be ritually unclean, najis. According to the Shiite rules of ritual impurity, najasha, this means that a Jew could contaminate a Muslim by touch and could contaminate a whole neighborhood if he stepped into the street in the rain or in snow, in which case the water running from him could cause his environmental impurity. In addition, the Jews in the 19th century continued to be subjected to the physical persecution that they had suffered since the 16th century when Iran became a Shiite state. They constituted the lowest social class, at least among the urban population. Some Jews lived in small provincial towns and villages, but most of the Jews lived in the major urban centers: Tehran, Hamadan, Yazd, Isfahan, Shiraz, Mushad, Kazvin, Busha, Kassan, and Kermanshah. The condition was best described by Lord Curzon, Persia and the Persian Question, London, 1892. Usually compelled to live apart in a ghetto or separate quarter of the towns, they have from time immemorial suffered from disabilities of occupation, dress, and habits which have marked them out as social pariahs from their fellow creatures. The majority of Jews in Persia are engaged in trade, in jewelry, in wine and opium manufacture, as musicians, dancers, scavengers, peddlers, and in other professions to which is attached no great respect. They are rarely attain to a leading mercantile position. In Isfahan, where they are said to be 3,700 and where they occupy a relatively better status than elsewhere in Persia, they are not permitted to wear the kola or Persian headdress, to have shops in the bazaar, to build the walls of their houses as high as their Muslim neighbors, or ride in the streets. In Tehran and Kassan, they are said to be found in large numbers and enjoying a fair position. In Shiraz, they are very badly off. At Busha, they are prosperous and free from persecution. As soon, however, as any outburst of bigotry takes place in Persia and elsewhere, the Jews are apt to be the first victims. The most significant event in these seasonal pogroms against the Jews was forced conversion to Islam in what remained of the Jewish community in Mashhad. in 1839, following the ransacking of the Jewish quarter and the massacre of the Jews by the incited Muslim mob. These forcibly converted Jews were not fully accepted into the Muslim Iranian society, and their position as newly converted was indicated by the application Jadid al Islam, neophyte to Islam. The Mushad converted Jews behaved like the Moranos in Spain in the 15th and 16th centuries, displaying their Islam outwardly and keeping as much as they could of their Judaism in secret, including making every possible effort to marry amongst themselves alone. Side by side with forced conversions to Islam, there was always a conversion out of choice by some individual Jews seeking to free themselves from the wretched conditions and move to privileged Muslim class. It is therefore an interesting question why so many Jews adopted the Bahai faith, a choice which seems to be like out of the frying pan and into the fire. The Bahai faith was born in Iran amid mounting messianic expectations, which engulfed the Shia as a whole when the year 1844 drew near. The date signified the Bahai faith was born in Iran amid the mounting messianic expectations which engulfed the Shia as a whole when the year 1844 drew near. This date signified 1,000 years after the disappearance of the 12th Imam, who the Shia believes to be the hidden Mahdi, the expected Messiah, whose advent it is believed will usher in a new age for Islam in particular and for the whole world as a whole. Once he comes, the Mahdi will finally establish the rule of the house of the Prophet, namely the Shiite version of Islam, righteousness and justice instead of the prevailing evil and tyranny. The expectations of the appearance of the Mahdi also assumed a practical form. In 1844, some Shiite disciples of the Shakai movement that had developed among its other teachings a particular veneration of the Imams initiated a search for the hidden Mahdi, who, according to their calculations, should have already appeared, or for the holy person who could have been in contact with him. It was exactly at that moment in time that Ali Muhammad from the city of Shiraz announced himself to be the promised one and assumed the title of Bab, that is to say, gate. This title was ambiguous enough to be interpreted either the gate to the hidden Imam Mahdi or the returned Mahdi himself. Soon as Babai community was created, the comprising members who came from various parts of Iran from all classes of Iranian society, including some influential Shiite clergymen. In the beginning, the teachings of the Bab were regarded as attempts to reform Islam. However, it soon became clear that his teachings amounted to no less than the creation of a new religion claiming to supersede Islam. His most important idea in this regard was that Muhammad and the Quran belonged to a prophetic cycle that had come to an end with his own appearance, and that the Islamic laws and other teachings of the Quran had been replaced by his own laws and teachings as defined in his holy book, the Bayan. One of his main reforms stressed the complete equality of the sexes, which meant that women were full partners in the new society that he envisaged. In 1848, the Bab's followers announced that his teachings constituted a new religion which was completely independent of Islam, although it did not negate the initial holiness of the Quran and the prophethood of Muhammad. The spread of the new religion, which was saturated with messianic enthusiasm and in a few places attracted violence, alarmed the Iranian government as well as the Shiite establishment. They regarded the Bab as a kind of revolutionary, and his close disciples, who included a woman, the poetess Fatima, nicknamed Qarat al Yan, as his dangerous agents, threatening the fragile structure of the Qajar monarchy and disturbing the flimsy equilibrium of the Iranian society. The Shah decided to execute the Bab and curtail the activity of his followers by systemic persecution. The Bab was executed by a firing squad on July 9th, 1850, in Tabriz, and his death was followed by a severe campaign of persecution against his adherents. This persecution intensified following a Babai attempt on the Shah's life in 1852. All the remaining original followers of the Bab, including Karat Alian, were tortured and killed. The death of the Bab, the pogroms which had been initiated and carried out by the state, and the mob incited by the Shiite clergy, the torture and executions decimated the Babai movement that had lost its prophet and his apostles. The rescue of the Babai movement came from one of the Bab's supporters, Mirza Hussein Ali Nuri, 1817 to 1892, who, in spite of the fact that he had never met the Bab, succeeded in rallying around himself the remnants of the movement and establishing himself as its true leader. In time, he named himself Baha'u'llah, that is to say, the splendor and glory of God. However, it was only in 1863 that he resolved to announce to a small group of followers in Baghdad, to which he had been exiled 10 years earlier, his claim to be an independent prophet, the manifestation of God, and the promised one of all religions. From Baghdad, he was again exiled, this time by the Ottoman government, first to Istanbul, then to Adrianople, and finally to Akka, or Akko, Akka, where he was confined to a cell in the citadel in 1868. 2 years later, he was released and moved to several places in Accra and its environs, and finally settled in the estate of Bahaji, where he lived for some 16 years until he passed away in 1892. In Idrin, already in 1866, Baha'u'llah had made his claim public, and within a short period, almost the whole of the Babai community accepted his leadership. And during the 24 years of his Akka period, he wrote his most important works, including the most holy book, Al Khatib al Aqdas, which he composed in Akka in about 1873. During those years, he completed the development of his religious system, which continued and fundamentally reformed the system of the Bab. He based his new religion on the model of three unities: the unity of God, the unity of religion, and the unity of the human race. This means that God can only be one, that all great religions and all prophets lead to the same sublime truth, and that all human beings are equal, and that this equality is final, complete, and undivided. It rejects any kind of discrimination on the basis of sex, ethnicity, color, or anything else. Since all humans are the leaves of one branch and the fruits of one tree, he envisaged a new world order according to which the whole world is one state, free of wars and devoid of all weapons, living in eternal peace, the most great peace. He forbade the Bahai to carry weapons of any kind, let alone use them. He called on the rulers of the world to agree on one common language of communication and to dedicate all efforts to achieve peace and human unity, which he regarded essential for the achievement of his divine plan for a new world order. This religion, based on love, peace, equality, and justice, which looked revolutionary for Iran at the time and represented apostasy to Islam at large, appeared to many in the East and the West as the perfect fulfillment of the messianic promises of the prophets of Israel and of Jesus. Baha'u'llah emphasized the messianic role of Jews, Christians, and Muslims, as well as to Buddhists and Zoroastrians, announcing that he was the promised savior whose advent they had all been anticipating. This claim was particularly effective in the case of Jews, Christians, and Shiite Muslims, all of whom were at the time in one state or another of messianic expectations, attracted many adherents, especially from Shiite and Jewish circles. The many Shiite followers were convinced that Baha'u'llah was either the Mahdi or Hussein Redivivus, the returned third Imam Hussein, whose revival the Shiite anticipated as one of the important signs of the event of the Qaim or the Mahdi. The messianic claims of the Baha'u'llah were further sustained, developed, and disseminated by his heirs, his son Abbas Effendi, Abdul Baha Abbas, 1844 to 1921, and the later's grandson, Shoghi Effendi Rabbani, 1897 to 1957. This messianic claim, in the Christian case, was very effective, particularly in the West, since Baha'u'llah affirmed that he was the spirit of truth and the comforter, and even more that he was the Father himself. It is not surprising, therefore, that the Christians who converted to the Baha'i faith were assured that Abdul Baha was the Son. Against this background, and with the prevailing Adventist expectations and Adventist movements active particularly in America and the German Templars in Germany and the Holy Land, the attraction of Christians to the new faith is understandable. They were assured that their long wait for the advent of the day of the Lord had ended with the appearance of both Father and Son and the inauguration, the millennium, leading to the final bliss of the most great peace. The messianic message of the Baha'i faith was, no doubt, one of the factors that attracted the Jews of Iran to the new religion. From ancient times, messianic expectations had flared up from time to time among the Jews in Iran. The biblical figure of Cyrus, the Persian emperor, who had urged the Jewish exiles to leave Babylon, return to the land of their fathers, and reestablish their national independence and state, and build the temple of the Lord in Jerusalem under his protection was very much alive in the hearts of Jews of Iran. They cherished the hope for the appearance once again of a new Cyrus who, like the Cyrus of old, whom the prophet Isaiah called the Lord's anointed or the Messiah of the Lord, would save them from the degrading, humiliating life of fear and deprivation, of persecution and poverty imposed on them by the Shiite Muslims of Iran. It is very possible that even in the 19th century, residues of the messianic hopes kindled by the false messiah Sabbatai Zevi 1626 to 1676, who had influenced Iranian Jewry in Safavid period, were still alive and under the surface. Baha'u'llah, however, was a different kind of messiah. He was Persian, homemade, who could well be a new Cyrus. There was even more than a hint of that in his claim to be the direct descendant of the last Sassanian king of Persia, Yazdgrid III, who had lost his kingdom to the Arab Muslims. He also asserted to the Zoroastrians that he was the expected king messiah Shah Baharam. Baha'u'llah, however, was a different kind of Messiah. He was Persian, homemade, who could well be a new Cyrus. There was even more than a hint of that in his claim to be the direct descendant of the last Sassanian king of Persia, Yazdgrid III, who had lost his kingdom to the Arab Muslims. He also asserted to the Zoroastrians that he was the expected king messiah Shah Baharam. The Jews in Iran were the first to convert to the Bahai faith already in the 70s of the 19th century. In Hamadan, the Jewish converts were particularly numerous, and it is estimated that at least one quarter of the Jewish community in the city adopted the new religion. In Gulpaigan, where there was a particularly educated Jewish community, about 75% of the Jews became Baha'is. Similar process of conversion, though not in such proportions, also occurred in other major cities in Iran, such as Kashan, Tehran, Kermanshah, Yazd, and Shiraz. The only major town where Jews did not adopt the Baha'i faith was in Isfahan because of the particular fanaticism of the Shiite clergy and population and the relentless persecution of the Baha'i in the city. Walter Fischel, one of the first scholars to study the conversion of the Jews to the Baha'i faith, regarded the messianic expectations as the main reason for this conversion. In all the studies and reports describing the Jewish attraction to the Baha'i faith, we find more or less the same reasons for the strange phenomenon, in which Jews willingly exchange one status of persecution with another. These reasons can be summed up as follows. 1. The Jews had been suppressed by the Muslims and labeled by them as najis, ritually defiling, filthy. For centuries, and in particular since Iran became a Shiite state, suddenly they found themselves being treated by the Baha'is, who had been Muslims, as equal human beings and even sought for as friends. They could share the once Muslim community life without being degraded and no longer had to attach a special badge to their clothes, publicly displaying their Jewishness. 2. The revolutionary liberal ideas of the new religion were particularly attractive. The equality of all humans, the abolition of all signs of discrimination, religious, social, or racial, the liberation of women, the rejection of all forms of violence, the striving for peace, and other similar ideas were for the Jews of Iran as attractive as the ideas of the French Revolution were for the Jews of Europe. 3. The becoming of the oneness of religion was understood by them as meaning that becoming Baha'i did not involve forsaking one's own religion. It was believed that the Baha'i faith was a movement professing attractive ideas aiming at reforming society and morals, and that one could be Jewish and Baha'i at the same time. This is what actually happened. Unlike the Jews who had converted to Islam and who were shunned by their family and the Jewish community at large, Jews who adopted the Baha'i faith remained an integral part of the families and the community. Most of them, in the first generation at least, continued observing the Jewish holidays. Many went to the synagogue as usual on Sabbath and were called to join the minyan, a quorum of the 10 men needed to perform public prayer, fasted on Yom Kippur, and some were even elected heads of the Jewish community. 4. The humanistic and liberal ideas of the Baha'i faith seem to be compatible with the words of the prophets of Israel in the Bible, to whom Baha'u'llah showed respect and whom he quoted as proof for the divine source of his own message. He acknowledged the greatness of Moses and the Torah, which he held valid and equal to other holy books of the world. He and his propagandists made an effort when approaching Jews to indulge in interpretations of biblical prophetic texts in order to prove his advent and had foreseen by the previous prophets. In many cases, the Baha'i propagandists knew the biblical text better than the Jewish listeners did. One of the most successful Baha'i propagandists in this regard was Abu al Fad Gulpagani, the erudite Baha'i scholar who, using these methods, was very active and successful in converting Jews in Hamadan. 5. As already hinted, the poor condition of Judaism in Iran played a no less important part in the success of the Baha'i propaganda among the Jews. For centuries, the Iranian Jews were virtually isolated from the rest of the world Jewry. They were cut away from all major centers of Jewish learning and developed nothing of their own. There was not even one yeshiva anywhere, and consequently, no proper Jewish leadership. As already hinted, the poor condition of Judaism in Iran played a no less important part in the success of the Baha'i propaganda among the Jews. For centuries, the Iranian Jews were virtually isolated from the rest of world Jewry. They were cut away from all major centers of Jewish learning and developed nothing of their own. There was not even one yeshiva anywhere, consequently, no proper Jewish religious leadership. The language Persian, which the Jews spoke, was also a great hindrance since it cut them off completely from their nearest Arabic speaking Jewish neighbors. In this situation, the so called Jewish rabbis in Iran that assumed the Muslim title of mullah were ignorant. They could hardly read Hebrew and barely knew the basics of very few Jewish laws. Jewish travelers who visit some of the Jewish communities tell amazing stories about the extent of the ignorance of the Jewish mullahs and their flock. It is therefore not surprising that the Baha'i emissaries to the Jews were far more knowledgeable than those rabbis, who in many cases were themselves convinced to join the new religion. The younger generation, which had no spiritual leaders to look up to, drifted away from the traditional Jewish life, looking for something satisfying to fill their free time. There was nothing open to them outside the Jewish community since the Muslim society was closed to them if they did not choose to convert. The Baha'i lecturers and instructors who came to the major towns such as Hamadan, Tehran, and Kashan with their universal message of equality and fraternity directed their activity particularly to Jews, quoting the Bible and interpreting its messianic message in an appealing and satisfying manner. For the first time, the Jews included some of the rabbis felt that there was way to escape the confines of their community and mingle with a section of the general Iranian society, which seemed safe. Joining the Baha'i faith, as indicated above, was not regarded as forsaking the religion of their ancestors. In time, of course, conversion to the new religion overcame the attachment to Judaism, and many Jewish converts became deeply involved in propagating the Baha'i cause, making a very valuable contribution to the spreading of the Baha'i teachings among the Jews. 6. The Baha'i leaders 6. The attitude of the Baha'i leaders to Judaism also impressed many Jews. In 1891, Baha'u'llah wrote directly to Baron Rothschild, announcing to him the imminent return of the Jews to the land of Israel. This idea remained constant in the messages to the Jews both in Iran and the United States that were delivered by Abu Baha during his visit there in 1912. In a letter which Abdul Baha wrote to the Jews in Iran in 1897, he did not leave any room for ambiguity about the messianic aspects which placed the Baha'i faith in the heart of Judaism. This intimate relation between the two religions was emphasized even more by the fact that all of the most important Baha'i holy sites were located in the land of Israel. Although this is the general picture based on the available, mainly Jewish sources, it is also clear from these sources that there was also negative reactions from the Jewish educational institutions that began intensive activity around in the second half of the 19th century. From 1875, the Alliance Israelite Universelle began its activity in Iran, and in 1880 opened the first schools in Tehran and Isfahan, and the Sephardic New York organization Otzar HaTorah, or in Persian, Ganji I Danesh, the treasure of knowledge, also opened schools for the Jews. Although the French oriented Alliance schools were not particularly interested in traditional Jewish education, nevertheless, they together with Otsar HaTorah provided a higher level of education and prepared the next generation of Jewish Iranian intellectuals with a better knowledge of Hebrew and access to the Jewish sources. In the long run, this led to a lowering of interest in conversion to the Baha'i faith towards the second decade of the 20th century, but not abolishing it. There are many cases of Jews who received a superior education in the Jewish schools, but whose education led them straight to the liberal ideas of the Baha'i faith, as it happened, for instance, with Elijah Sabat, a son of a rabbi from Isfahan. Baha'i children were also sent to these Jewish schools in the same way that Jews went to the Baha'i schools, which, as we shall see, were established at about the same period. This education was naturally very beneficial, and it was available also to the poorer Jews of the ghetto. On the one hand, led to a second wave of conversion to the new faith between 1880 and 1898. But on the other, it opened up great opportunities for the Baha'i and the Jews after the fall of the Qajars and the establishment of the Pahlavi monarchy, and enabled the Jews and the Baha'is to enter the highest governmental and economic posts in the country. From 1865, the emissaries of the Alliance Israelite Universelle had begun sending the reports about the Jews in Iran, particularly Hamadan, to the headquarters of the organization in Paris. These reports supplied detailed information about the abysmal conditions of the Jews there and helped from time to time in mobilizing influential Jewish leadership in the West, such as Sir Moses Montefiore, to use their influence within the French and British governments to intervene with the Iranian government and ease some of the pogroms or get some Persian governmental protection for the Jewish quarters in some of the main towns. From these reports, it is clear that the situation of the Jews in Hamadan was particularly bad. Persecutions, pogroms, and forced conversions to Islam occurred repeatedly during the 19th century. Individual Jews were murdered, and Jewish shops and homes were looted by the mob and cited on a regular basis by the Shiite religious leaders, many of whom were personally involved in murdering Jews. The state affairs continued until almost the second decade of the 20th century, even as late as 1911, long after the Constitutional Revolution of 1906. Severe persecution of Jews in Hamadan continued. Baha'is in Hamadan lived in or near Jewish neighborhoods, and sometimes one suffered because of the persecution of the other. However, much sympathy was shown by the Jews to their Baha'i neighbors, and common danger brought them together. Whatever the reason, the Jews of Hamadan, as mentioned above, were the first to accept the Baha'i faith. There is a report that the first conversion of some Jewish individuals in Hamadan occurred already in 1852, the year of severe persecution of Babis. The poetess Qarat Alayan is said to have been the initiator of the conversion process in Hamadan following her visit to the city in 1847. When still in Iraq, she met a Jewish physician named Hakim Masih, who later became a court physician to Muhammad Shah, who died in 1848. At this meeting, Masih was very impressed by the eloquence of Qarat Alayan and also by the liberal teachings of the Bab as presented by her. Apparently, he converted to the Babi faith in 1860 after meeting an imprisoned Babi named Mullah Sadiq e Mukaddas Ismu Allah al Atsdak, a survivor of the Great Battle of Sheikh Tabarsi. Thus, he gained the place of the first Jew in the world to adopt the new faith. When the news reached Baha'u'llah, he sent him a special epistle. In spite of the fact that Hakim Masih was an important personality, being the Shah's physician, his influence on the Jewish community was negligible. Hakim Masih was the grandfather of Dr. Lutfu La Hakim, 1888 till 1968, a member of the First Universal House of Justice. In spite of the conversions made so early, we still have to wait for the years 1877 to 1880 to witness the first wave of Jewish conversion en masse to the Baha'i faith in Hamadan and elsewhere. As to the activity of Qarat Alayan in Hamadan, it is reported that she conducted talks with two Jewish rabbis, Mullah Ilya Eliyahu and Mullah Lahazar El Azhar, which led to attracting members of the Jewish faith to the Babi fold. If this piece of information is true, then the Jews in this case were extremely brave to join a movement that was deemed to be an open rebellion against the Shah. The appearance of a woman in Hamadan displaying queenly qualities, clever, erudite, and eloquent, evoked among the Jews in the city memories closely connected with another woman, whose tomb was a center of veneration there. This was Queen Esther, the Jewish Persian empress who, together with her uncle Mordecai, whose tomb next to hers is equally venerated, saved the Jews of her time from extermination using a combination of her beauty and wisdom. Book of Esther. The biblical story of the Book of Esther has always been a source of pride, hope, and happiness for the Jews. For the Jews in Hamadan, it had an added value. The tombs of two Jewish Persian heroes, sites of pilgrimage for Jews and non Jews, assured them that God's commitment to save his people. For a while, they could perceive Qorat Alayan as a new Esther with her message of the imminent redemption offered by the new faith. Her given name was Fatima, but she also is known by the epithet Zaran Taj, the Golden Crown, a name which could not have been missed by those attributed to her regal qualities. The success of the Bahai propagandists in Hamadan was overwhelming. In 1878, Ali Muhammad bin Azdak, a Bahai missionary, came from Khorasan to Hamadan in order to convert Jews. The first Jew to convert in that year was a physician, Hakim Akat Jan, who left his medical practice to become a full time propagandist for his new religion and succeeded in converting many more Jews in Hamadan. Having some access to the Jewish scriptures as well as to the New Testament and the Quran, he used these sources to bring proofs about the truth of the Baha'i faith and persuade others, both Jews and non Jews, to join it. Hakim Akajan was very successful. He convinced Hakim Rahim Hafiz as Shihin, his uncle, to adopt the Baha'i faith, and from then on, conversion on a family basis began. He attracted 40 close members of his family and friends, including his wife, Tuti Khanum, his five sisters, their husbands, and then his brother, Eli, as well as his own father, who was a prominent rabbi in the city. Then the advent of the success of the Baha'i propagandists in Hamadan was overwhelming. In 1878, Ali Muhammad bin Azdak, a Baha'i missionary, came from Khorasan to Hamadan in order to convert Jews. The first Jew to convert in that year was a physician, Hakim Akat Jan, who left his medical practice to become a full time propagandist for his new religion and succeeded in converting many more Jews in Hamadan. Having some access to the Jewish scriptures as well as to the New Testament and the Quran, he used these sources to bring proofs about the truth of the Baha'i faith and persuade others, both Jews and non Jews, to join it. Hakim Akajan was very successful. He convinced Hakim Rahim Hafiz as Shihin, his uncle, to adopt the Baha'i faith, and from then on, conversion on a family basis began. He attracted 40 close members of his family and friends, including his wife, Tuti Khanum, his five sisters, their husbands, and then his brother, Eli, as well as his own father, who was a prominent rabbi in the city. Hakim Akka continued to visit the synagogue for Shabbat prayers, announcing there and then that the event of Baha'u'llah was the Day of the Lord. At about the same time, a series of debates took place that were later recorded and published in a book by the name of Gulshan e Hakaka, Rose Garden Truths, one of the most important books of Baha'i polemics. The author was Haji Mahdi Arjarmand of Hamadan, a nephew of Hakim Akajan. The book was directed mainly to Christians and Muslims. It applied the methods that had already been developed in Baha'i propaganda with extensive use of biblical and Quranic quotations in order to prove the truths of the Baha'i faith. The book also contained certain parts that were directed to the Jews of Iran. However, the methods of propaganda displayed to them were not much different from the methods used by any of the Christian missionaries who had been quite active among the Jews in Iran, but unlike the Baha'is, with very limited success. To the Jews, the Goshan Hakika also presented the idea that the appearance of Baha'u'llah had already been foreseen and reported by the prophets of Israel. And therefore, when he announced that he was the one whose advent had been prophesied in both the Old and New Testaments, his claim was regarded to have a solid basis. Ajaman, however, did not refrain from attacking Jews and Christians when he thought they opposed him, but was very lenient and very accommodating when it came to Muslims. As pointed out, It was first among the Jews of Hamadan that Baha'i efforts were the most successful. A Jewish source from 1884, a traveler from the Ephraim Newmark, as pointed out, it was among the Jews of Hamadan that the Baha'i efforts were most successful. A Jewish source from 1884, the traveler Ephraim Newmark, reports that not only about a quarter of the Hamadani Jews converted to the Baha'i faith, but among the converts were very distinguished members of the Jewish community, like Meir ben Haji el Azar, probably the son of Lalai Zar, who had met Korat Alayan, Hakim Avram, Mullah Rabbi Yeshekel, Mullah Yehuda ben Mullah Hakim, and Hakim Musa. The same phenomenon can be perceived in other major towns where Jews were subsequently attracted to the Baha'i faith. According to the reports of the Jewish elders in Kashan, half of Baha'is in the city were Jewish origin, among them several notable families, such as Amanat, Burgess, Methakanian, Mutahadden, Rehani, Yusufan, and others. The conversion of most of the Jewish community in Gulpegan, where there was a larger concentration of Jewish physicians, should not seem unusual. For the more Jews were educated, the more they were attracted to Baha'i teachings. The Baha'i propagandists themselves were overall highly educated. Abu al-Fakhdil Gulpagani was an outstanding example. And of no less importance was the fact that many of the teachings of Baha'u'llah, as presented them, had already been available in print. To answer the need of providing good education to children, a network of Baha'i schools developed. In Hamadan and Kashan, where most of the Jewish Baha'i lived, it was largely at the instigation and through the contribution of Jewish Baha'is that these schools were established and that they were open to Jewish children, as well as the language instruction was Persian. The curriculum included sciences and foreign languages, and the schools introduced the most pedagogical methods, displaying a real evolution in the educational system. Two schools were opened in Hamadan, Ta'id for boys and Mohabet for girls, and two in Kashan, the Vahadat e Bashar schools for boys and girls. These schools were open parallel to the establishment of schools of the Alliance Universelle Israel. As pointed out, it was among the Jews of Hamadan that the Baha'i efforts were most successful. A Jewish source from 1884, the traveler Ephraim Newmark, reports that not only about a quarter of the Hamadani Jews converted to the Baha'i faith, but among the converts were very distinguished members of the Jewish community, like Meir ben Haji el Azar, probably the son of Lalai Zar, who had met Korat Alayan, Hakim Avram, Mullah Rabbi Yeshekel, Mullah Yehuda ben Mullah Hakim, and Hakim Musa. The same phenomenon can be perceived in other major towns where Jews were subsequently attracted to the Baha'i faith. According to the reports of the Jewish elders in Kashan, half of Baha'is in the city were Jewish origin, among them several notable families, such as Amanat, Burgess, Methakanian, Mutahadden, Rehani, Yusufan, and others. The conversion of most of the Jewish community in Gulpegan, where there was a larger concentration of Jewish physicians, should not seem unusual. For the more Jews were educated, the more they were attracted to Baha'i teachings. The Baha'i propagandists themselves were overall highly educated. Abu al-Fakhdil Gulpagani was an outstanding example. And of no less importance was the fact that many of the teachings of Baha'u'llah, as presented them, had already been available in print. To answer the need of providing good education to children, a network of Baha'i schools developed. In Hamadan and Kashan, where most of the Jewish Baha'i lived, it was largely at the instigation and through the contribution of Jewish Baha'is that these schools were established and that they were open to Jewish children, as well as the language instruction was Persian. The curriculum included sciences and foreign languages, and the schools introduced the most pedagogical methods displaying a real evolution in the educational system. Two schools were opened in Hamadan, Ta'id for boys and Mohabet for girls, and two in Kashan, the Vahadat e Bashar schools for boys and girls. These schools were open parallel to the establishment of schools of the Alliance Universelle Israel. These schools were open parallel to the establishment of the schools of the Alliance Israelite Universelle and achieved a great success. By 1920, there were about 60 such Baha'i schools all over the country, including Tehran, Hamadan, Kashan, in which Jewish and Baha'i children learned together. These schools provided excellent education and at the same time, no doubt, additional conduits for Jewish conversion. In 1899, under the influence of a Jewish convert from Hamadan, Haji Yahuda, the son of a Jewish rabbi from Rasht, adopted the new religion, believing that Baha'u'llah was the promised Messiah, an idea he transmitted to his father's adherents. In this way, the Baha'i faith was introduced to a northern Jewish community in Iran. The Alliance Israelite reported 30 Jews in Rashat in 1904, and it is likely that the majority of these were Baha'i converts. This is also due to the fact that three of four Baha'i Jewish families moved from Hamadan to Rashat, following which a few more Jews that were converted. In Masha'a, where the Jews were forced to convert to Islam, there were some early Baha'i conversions in about 1873. One of the most active in these areas was Mizra Aziz Ullah, the son of a rabbi who converted in 1876, thus escaping his status as neophyte of Islam by adopting the new faith and announcing that Baha'u'llah was the guide of the people of Israel. In other words, that the adoption of the Baha'i faith amounted to the deliverance of the Jews from the Islamic religion forced on them. To the reasons already mentioned, the Jewish attraction to the Baha'i faith, one should add the fact that when the mass Jewish conversion to the new faith took place, Baha'u'llah was still alive, conducting his activities and sending his messages and emissaries from Holy Land. His messianic figure was real, and he spoke openly from the land of the prophets of Israel about the return to Zion and about the renewal of the ancient Jewish independence. The Jews no doubt regarded him as a new Cyrus and as a Jewish Messiah at the same time. His message seemed to have been speaking clearly in those terms. These were solid arguments which the new Jewish converts could easily communicate to their co religionists. Thus, the conversion of the Jews brought not only new adherents to the faith, but also excellent propagandists to its cause, which could act within the Jewish communities without hindrance. It is not surprising that so many of the Iranian Jewish families have Baha'i relatives. The conversion of the Baha'i religion slowed down from the second decade of the 20th century and ceased almost completely in its third decade. There are a few reasons for this development. The introduction to Iran of the Zionist activities and the rise of Reza Shah Pahlavi, both these developments connected with the flourishing of secular national ideas. The Zionist movement excited the youth with its modern national revival, and the rise of Reza Shah replaced the fanatic religious Shia ideology in power, which was predominant in Iran during the Qajar dynasty. With a royal policy aiming at regeneration of the ancient Iranian national identity, the Jewish youth and intellectuals had, as a result, two new objectives to which they were attracted, two goals, both of which were national and secular. The first one involved Jewish pride and true hope for Jewish redemption by the Jewish people itself. For the Jews of Iran, it meant that the end of their long isolation from the rest of the Jewish world. The second meant that the Jews could, for the first time, take part in an all Iranian national effort, unhindered by the traditional status of the outcasts to which the Shia had subjected them. The establishment of the State of Israel in 1948 and mass migration of Iranian Jews to it closely completed the Baha'i chapter in the modern history of Iranian Jewry.